There's a new one-cost reroll comp that's dominating ladder that's helping Masters players climb to Challenger, gaining hundreds of LP per day. Introducing Bastion Morgana, a composition that you can one-trick all the way to Challenger if you set your mind to it, and if you're not that contested. In this episode of ITD, we're going to hop on board with Rank 1 North America Wasianiverson to show us just how to get all that free LP. Before we start, I want to give credit to the player that was first highlighting this. He goes by the username of PawnXWX on North America, climbed hundreds of LP, spamming this composition all the way from Masters to Challenger. As you can see in his profile, literally no filters whatsoever. Morgana Bastion, 300 LP in a day, 2.9 average placement. Literally just one-tricking this composition all the way from Masters to Challenger. The game plan is pretty straightforward for a one-cost reroll if you played it in the past. You're going to want to not use any gold for leveling early and collect as many copies of Morganas and the cheap Bastions, specifically Poppy and Jax. You can go ahead and sell things like Shyvana, Galio, and Jins, and like all these other 2 and 3 costs because you really only care about Morgana and ideally Poppy 3. You can also tank Jax, by the way, if Poppy's really contested. Let's say for some reason people are playing Poppy Hero Augment, you can't hit Poppy. You can also go for Jax with your tank. But Poppy is definitely one of the best. At stage 3-1, you still should be level 4. You haven't used any gold for leveling. You should be able to roll down to around 30-40 gold range to try to collect as many one-cost copies as possible. And then for the rest of the stage, roll above 50 gold for 3-star Morgana and Poppy. At level 5, you can play 2 Bastions and 3 Dynamo. And then at level 6, you can play 4 Bastions and 2 Dynamo. And then from that point on, just keep adding either 1 Dynamo or another Bastion as your breakpoint. The board caps the highest around Renekton because Renekton 2 and Aurora 2 will help you win the game. You can also put items on them. And you don't have to play Jhin for Exotech. You can also play Elise as well because Elise adds some nice magic resistance reduction. Some really good augments to consider are power scaling ones. So if you get things like investment strategy to put onto your Bastion board, that's really nice, just making your board really, really tanky. Cooking Pot is also really good because you make a Bastion emblem. That lets you drop things like Galio and play a 4th Dynamo, and that helps you cap your board really nicely. And then, of course, don't forget to just take strong econ augments like Prismatic Ticket and Shop Glitch, Starry Night, just so that you can hit all these things very, very quickly. Best in slot Morgana is going to be Blue Buff, Gunblade, and ideally an AP item, but it's going to be hard to get that, so a lot of times you can put Morello. But I've seen many people do Death Cap, Archangels, things like that, and it's also very, very good. Poppy ends up being your primary tank, and a lot of times you actually want to position Morgana on the same side as Poppy. We're probably actually going to flip this because the guide should actually show Morgana to be in the bottom right if you're trying to target the top right. This is because if you look at what Poppy does, she throws a buckler at the farthest enemy within 4 hexes, dealing magic damage. And so what ends up happening is Poppy ends up throwing her buckler to the top right corner, and if Morgana's here, she's going to be targeting the nearest units as well, so she's going to curse this unit, then she'll curse this unit, and then she'll curse the top right unit. And then once that person takes enough damage, they just end up dying. So this ends up being really useful for Poppy to try and snipe other backline units. Also, a fun thing about this composition is that this actually counters other people who are trying to counter your Sejuani positioning. For example, a lot of people position like this, and that's to stop Sejuani, so that way Sejuani doesn't get the ult onto the Vayne. In this case, the Sejuani is going to ult like this, and Vayne's going to stay safe. This ends up countering that because Sejuani walks up here, and then Galio goes straight to the back and ends up stunning the unit in the top corner a lot of times. So you can actually get away with playing Morgana in spots like this. Just make sure you put Poppy here in this instance. And of course, if you're trying to counter other people's Sejuani position, if their Sejuani is here, just put your Morgana over here and make sure the Shyvana is not in the spot somewhere else. So that way you're safe from your enemy Sejuani as well. Last couple of shoutouts of different items that might be important to know. Bastion Emblem ends up being pretty decent on Morgana, and that's because they buffed Bastion to give more ability power. It converts a portion of its armor resistances as ability power. So it's nice to actually get a Bastion Emblem, put it on Morgana for the mid and late game, then the very, very late game, remove this Bastion Emblem for like a death cap and put it onto, like Aurora or somebody else, and you just end up getting a really nice mid-game boost from that. The other thing is Blooding Jewel is still super insane on Morgana. If you get this build, it is incredible. So make sure to get this set up if you can. Get some artifact for Morgana with blue buff and just watch her pop off. Let's hop on board with Wasianiverson's POV. He is on the encounter to split or not to split, which is a simple gold resource injection at the middle of each stage. It's kind of like gold subscription, but instead of at the beginning of each stage, you are going to get in the middle. And you also get a little bit of agency, a fun little prisoner's dilemma where you choose to take or split. It's a featured hack, and I guess Riot just thinks it's funny. So you get some more extra gold, and it helps you with your fast 8, fast 9 comps, or if you are trying to spike your reroll in the middle of a stage. Right away, Wasian is already doing something a little bit neat. He is delaying to buy this Zyra instead of just making the Zyra 2 because he wants the option of making gold if he wants to, which is exactly what he does, actually. So he's going to sell everything to 10, and that's enabled by the fact that he didn't field the Zyra 2. And that's actually a really small but subtle and important play by Wasian because now he's making gold one round before everybody else. And just like in anything, when it comes to money, the earlier you can make it to scale it with compound interest, the better it is. So now he's already very economically ahead everybody else. It's a lot more important to do this when you're not in an econ portal, but because he already is dedicated to trying to play a one-cost reroll in his mind, it's going to be important for him to make that gold. Let's take a look at his early augment here. Crown Guarded, Cluttered Mine, and Investment Strategy. Crown Guarded is actually a really good augment to start things off, and it ends up being just a lot of shield that people have to deal with. Kind of like Warmogs. Warmogs just gives you so much health that you can't really like deal with it if you don't have enough 2-star or items slammed. Same thing, Crown Guarded just gives you a really fat shield, and then a lot of frontline units scale off the ability power, so it ends up being really nice on specifically a lot of like Vanguards and certain bruisers, like Mordekaiser was really good with it. Also, this patch, items are just rare to get. A lot of people are just struggling to make items work because Riot has reduced the number of item component drops. And so taking item augments are really valuable currently. A very common strategy for people is just to take the first powerful item augment you can to just start establishing some tempo and momentum. Cluttered Mine is pretty straightforward, and it's actually nice because, you know, you can always use it to try and 2-star some units and start getting some win streak as well as EXP. It's a really good economic, right down the middle, very safe option. Investment Strategy is also really interesting for one-cost reroll in particular, especially because he already has started making interest. So this is even better than usual. We're also on an econ portal where Investment Strategy can get higher value because you should be able to make more interest while re-rolling for some of those one costs. Investment Strategy is really good with bruisers because your bruisers will give you more mileage on your HP. They'll give you 40, 70% more HP if you're able to hit the high break points. Investment Strategy is also really good with Vanguards because it scales off your max HP. So there's actually a lot to like. But specifically, Investment Strategy is also very good with resistances. It gives you more effective HP. High HP times resistances ends up making your board way tankier. So it's a very good augment for one-cost reroll in particular. He rolls the middle option and it's Heroic Grab Bag, and he's about to roll the left option as well. The thing about Heroic Grab Bag is that your power spike kind of early, like you're this kind of strong, and all of a sudden you spike because you hit your 3 stars, and then slowly you fall off over time until everyone who has combat augments catch up to you with your board strength quality, and then you just kind of fall off. With Investment Strategy, you're just kind of like a steady curve, higher and higher and higher and higher, and then eventually you just have a point where you just have too much HP. You know, there's just like a breaking point where people just cannot actually deal. Like, this is the max DPS they'll do. Investment Strategy outcaps them. Okay. So he actually rerolled his first option, Crown Guard, into BRB. And BRB is really good right now because there's just a major amount of item deficits. Not to mention that he'll be able to spike really hard on stage 3 with ideally 3 items on his carry and a tank, or maybe 2 items on his backline carry and 2 items on his frontline tank minimum. He might even get more components. Right now, because of the way item drops are, there's just higher variance around your items. So having item manipulation is really big. Not to mention there's also 2 extra gold here, which kind of helps get him going along the way. So investment strategy actually is quite good, but I think right now the items are really important to secure. Okay, so BRB it is. It's interesting, by the way, they took BRB and he's choosing not to do any actions, and he's specifically positioning in a way that he is going to guarantee lose by having the Morgana in the front row. He wants to guarantee his lose streak so that way he can get that tier off carousel and get that blue buff guaranteed. All right, and I guess there's nothing else really to do here, so let's go ahead and fast forward and get to that carousel because he is going to be losing all these fights. All right, here we are on carousel. Looks like the tier is heading his way. Oh, I think he may have been raced for it, but he ends up getting it. Very nice. And the worst case scenario, if he didn't get this blue buff and you open an anvil, there's a chance that he might see it, but it's just good to guarantee it. Blue buff is definitely Morgana's best item, so we want to make sure he had that in the bank. You can perform actions again, and immediately he's introduced with gain 4 gold or split 10 with other splitters. The general rule of thumb here is you should just pretty much always take, unless taking and being wrong on the split is not too punishing. So because we're at this point in the game where it's really important for you to make your early interest thresholds, usually you're supposed to take the 4 gold. The other scenario we can take split 10 gold is when you're really far ahead economically. Let's say you already have 50 gold and you're making maximum interest. Not that big of a deal to miss. You split with like 3, 4, 5 other people. They're all getting punished, but you're already very far ahead economically, so it's not that big of a deal. I think that's when you can take these kinds of things. Otherwise, just take the gold. Okay, our shop has the bastions, and I think we are probably going to hold on to the anvils. Looks like 2 players chose a split, so those players got 1 extra gold. Congratulations to them. We don't need to pop these anvils quite yet because we're coming up on creep rounds in 2 rounds anyways. We're probably not going to win any of these fights. If you pop these anvils and then don't slam, and then those items drop anyways, let's say he drops a Sunfire, but he opened a Sunfire off his anvil, he's going to be sad that he did that. So you might as well just wait, make sure you can get maximum information, and just commit to losing. But by dropping this blue buff on Morgana, he ends up killing a couple of units, which is very nice. So he saves 2 HP this way. Poppy 2 is in the shop, but I don't think he wants to make it. In fact, there's an argument for him to take this Morgana off the board just to guarantee that he doesn't have enough board strength. At this stage of the game, a lot of people end up trying to intentionally weaken their board because there's usually 2 people who are playing for like a loose streak. So he's taking the Morgana off the board right now. Completely logical. He sees that his opponent even tried to also do the same thing. They're trapping their units in the corner. This is a very, very common strategy to play for loose streak. And make sure that you can secure it. If he played the Morgana here with blue buff, he might have been able to kill 1 unit, but it's just not worth the potential downside of being wrong, queuing to somebody, and then being too strong for that fight and winning. And maximizing the loose streak econ is very, very valuable. All right, our PV drops is a glove, which is not exactly the best component, and drops 2 cloaks as well. So he has defensive items and 1 sword. Sword's a little bit awkward to use, and he also has a reforger. So let's go ahead and open up this first one. The first choice that he probably is considering is whether or not he wants Archangels, Warmogs, and Red Buff. The advantage of Archangels is that it's just a power AP item for Morgana, and Bastions is a really good frontline that just stalls out for her. The longer you stall in the fight, the more Archangel is going to ramp up, giving you ability power, and so it just ends up being very good win condition for stall compositions. The other upside of Archangels is that we have 1 sword already, and that wants to become a Gunblade, so we can pretty much just finish our Gunblade, and then we have all items on Morgana done. The downside of Archangels is that we also have a Glove, and Glove tends to be much more of an offensive item. And so we won't really have good use of that glove unless we open a vest to make a steadfast heart. And that's the only real defensive item. I guess you can make a Thief's Gloves, but it's not particularly good. Warmogs is a very nice choice here. Warmogs ends up being a frontline item that can help complement his Dragon's Claw. And right now he has 0 frontline items built. So it's safe to take a defensive item here first because he still has yet to pop another Anvil. And, you know, we kind of talked about like the risk of Archangels. If we popped Archangels and then we pop like Gunblade here, then we have no use of this offensive components. But if you take Warmogs and then you pop this Anvil, you have 1 full defensive item, 1 full offensive item, and then kind of a mix of both in between. You should be able to theoretically triple stack 1 unit and be safe, right? So you can take 1 defensive item to make sure that you have enough space for the second Anvil to have an impact as well. You can also take Red Buff here because utility is always just really safe to take. He also has no anti-heal components. He doesn't have any belts or bows or rods. So if he ends up taking Red Buff, this is just to make sure his utility is secured. I'm spending a lot of time on this because this is probably going to be some of the most important decision making he does all game with how he does his items. Because again, items deficits make your item decisions really important. Because rolling forward with the Morgana and everything like that is going to be pretty straightforward once he finishes his items. You also could take Adaptive Helm. It's something I didn't talk about. Adaptive Helm is like a jack of all trades, master of none. And I would say that it's like blue buff, but worse. It's kind of like a Protector's Vow, but worse for the front line as well. So it's just kind of like a little bit of a hybrid item that's flexible and it trades off some sharp power. So, and I just don't think that we don't need it right now because we're not trying to favor flexibility. We're trying to get strong items on our power units. So after long deliberation, looks like he takes his Warmogs, and I think that makes a lot of sense. He opens up his second Anvil. 3 items we don't really want at all. We don't really want Last Whisper. It's an AD item. We don't really want Harunia's Hurricane. Again, it's a physical damage item. And Hand of Justice is much more for melee or crit-based builds that we're not really utilizing right now. So it's pretty much just Jewel Gauntlet and Bramble Vest. Jewel Gauntlet is okay for Morgana, but you kind of need to have like a high amount of base ability power because otherwise the crit isn't going to do a lot of damage by itself. Remember, crit is a multiplier on a base number that needs to be high. If you're multiplying like a crit strike on low damage, it's ultimately not doing a lot. And right now we have a Morgana 1, so it's not very, very powerful. But we do have a Bramble Vest here. And Bramble Vest is really nice because it complements with our Dragon's Claw. And Dragon's Claw with Warmogs is like a pretty good trio set of items. And that just secures our frontline guaranteed. Not to mention that it kills all of our components for defensive. And the only thing remaining is a sword and a glove, which can kind of build towards what we want anyways, which is the Gunblade and things like Jewel Gauntlet or Guard Breaker or whatever we want. And so the remaining components ends up being quite good for us to play for on Carousel, which we should be able to do because we are low HP. That's a lot of yapping to basically say Bramble Vest is probably the correct choice here, which is what he's going to do. Pretty obvious to anybody who's played at like a challenger level, but really important to map out if you're starting to learn about item economy. And now that we picked a Bramble Vest, we can go ahead and start rolling. All right, looks like we tech in the Elise. We triple stack our Poppy. We're putting Poppy in the front center, and we're just going to be spending most of the stage rolling for the Bastions and the 1 costs. Looks like, unfortunately, it's a little bit awkward where we made a Morgana 2, and she's on the bench, but it's okay, because if we find another Morg 2, this will end up combining to be the one on the board. It could be an awkward situation where the Morgana 1 has the items and you have to use a remover. And it's not the end of the world. You get free removers, but it always feels bad to lose one. I also wanted to rewind really quickly and point out that the reason why he rolled down to 33 was because he wanted to maximize his odds for 1 costs. Once he gets to 5, he's going to decrease his chances of 1 cost. And because he's rolling for multiple of them, he just rolls to like 33 because even if he has the worst case scenario, he's guaranteed to make 40. You could also roll the 30 if you want, but it's a little bit risky because you can't make 40, and that ends up being some econ that delays your ability to rebound. All right, let's take a look at his second augment here. Find Your Center is an augment that's actually not too bad if you're trying to play around a super tank or a super melee carry. It's actually not bad for the Poppy here because the 15% max HP is actually really nice to keep the Poppy alive, and kind of like we talked about it, really good resistances. And max HP ends up having good synergy for that Poppy. Item grab bag is not really necessary because we already have items from BRB, so it just doesn't feel like we actually really want this. Health of Wealth is okay. It's kind of a hybrid augment. It's like half combat, half econ. And I don't think it's that good here, but if he's feeling like he needs the econ, he might end up taking it. Instead of rolling options 1 and 2, finds late game specialist. This is just a completely impractical augment to think about because he's not going to hit level 9 anytime soon. So probably no deal. And then team building is interesting to think about. But again, these duplicators are much higher value on 2 and 3 costs and not 1 cost because he has to roll for so many 1 costs. So it's just not very gold efficient to take team building unless the 1 cost was so important to hit quickly so he can push levels and get to things like his 4 and 5 cost. That's not really the case. So I think that he's probably leaning towards health as well. It's a good mixture of combat and econ, which is what we're talking about, and he might really want that. All right, health as wealth it is, and we're pretty much going to be playing the rest of this stage on autopilot in terms of just getting the Morgana rolls and the Poppy rolls. So we're going to go ahead and play this at 2x speed because pretty straightforward. In the meantime, we'll talk a little bit about broad macro. On Carousel, is going to be looking to take Rod for Gunblade or perhaps a belt for a Guard Breaker. Kind of just depends what's available. If there is a pan, he might consider taking it for the Bastion emblem, but I don't think that he should take it right now because he doesn't have a vest. So it's just too many like things that have to go right. He has to get a pan on the carousel, and he has to get a vest at the end of the stage, and then he has to still find the components to finish the sword and glove. So it's very, very expensive. He's going to be rolling each turn to see if he can get to Morgana 3 and Poppy 3, but once he hits both of those, he probably will stop trying to reroll for other things like Jax. Because Jax is not that important. You pretty much just roll for any 3-cost tank you can get to as soon as possible, and then play Morgana 3. Because if you hit Jax 3 and you have no items for him, then there's not really much of a point. Going back to sort of the item deficit that we talked about in the current meta, if you have a really strong upgraded board but no items for them, they just don't really have much of an impact. Interesting enough, he actually got presented with a hacked carousel that offers 2 components. And this is actually really important to consider, which is you should be thinking about what 2 components you want going to carousel in case something like this happens. In this situation, he definitely wanted to take the Rod. And also, it just so happens that Rod is on a Morgana as well. So that could be pretty good. And he could reforge one of these components here that he doesn't want. Glove probably is a component that he wants the least because this bow can end up being utility in the form of shred and anti-heal. So I'm leaning towards that. The other option you could take is this Neferi with a Tear because Tear ends up being just generally a really good component in these AP comps. So I'd favor either of those. Another take or split here. And this is another situation where I think you just take the 6 gold. It's just too optimistic to take the split and hope that you can come out ahead. In general, you're just going to be far behind. And it's going to feel bad because we saw 2 splitters earlier get an extra gold. If you end up just kind of putting yourself in a situation where you lose gold because of this, you're going to feel really bad. So just take the gold. 2 players shows a split, so it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's okay. It happens. One thing really nice about Gunblade for health as wealth is that it ends up being a way for you to activate it much quicker. So because he has Gunblade on Morgana, he's going to be dealing a lot of damage. He's going to activate health as wealth pretty quickly. The more I'm thinking about the pick, the more I like it, which I think is a really smart pick by Wasianiverson. All right, so we hit everything. We hit the Morg 3 and the Poppy 3, and we have the Poppy positioned close to the center, so that way she can always target the corner units. And he's playing 3 Dynamo and 2 Bastion on 5, and then on 6, he goes for 4 Bastion, 2 Dynamo. It all just kind of makes sense. You can see that the Poppy ends up shooting the Jhin in the back, and then the Morgana and the Poppy work together to burn everything down. Very good positional synergy like we talked about. And quite frankly, the rest of this game should be pretty much on autopilot. The most important part of this game was the macro and the first 2 stages of how he's navigated through this. From here, it's pretty much just pushing levels, adding more bastions, and then hopefully hitting your very top end like Renekton. He's looking for a 3rd item here for Morgana. He can definitely take care of his utility first. He really wants some shred, so it looks like Shiv is going to be the item priority here to start things off. He could slam a Steadfast Heart, but the Steadfast Heart would have to go on another Bastion. It would have to go on Jax because he's the tankiest Bastion remaining. So I don't think it's actually really wise for him to use the Vest here because he's using the other half of anti-heal, and I think that's really important to keep on right now. All right, let's take a look at his final augment here. Overheal is really good with a bunch of Rage Blade users. Anything that just like gives you a bunch of attack speed to get multiple attacks. This ends up being really good in. Very good in Aphelios, very good in Zeri, very good in those kind of like double Rage Blade setups. Not very applicable here. Stand United, well, we're not really playing many active traits, and we actually already hit, so these don't really seem applicable right now. He finds Glass Cannon, which is actually something to consider right now because, one, taking the 10% damage from Glass Cannon is not that big of a deal because we have Morgana with Gunblade. And 2, the more damage we deal, the more we're actually going to heal with the Gunblade itself. So it ends up having some good synergy with the front line as well. So Glass Cannon is a very small buff also to his front line. I really like when that ends up happening. Not to mention that ends up making Elise a little bit more of a threat. And overall, I think this is quite a solid augment now that they buffed it. It was pretty bad before, but they buffed it for a little bit of damage amp. Now it seems pretty decent here. He rolls his right 2 silvers here, Pandora's and Blistering Strikes. Yeah, you know what? We don't have anti-heal. You could consider taking Blistering Strikes here and Pandora's items. But the thing is, our items are almost perfect already. Like, we pretty much just lack one thing remaining for Morgana, which is an AP item like Death Cap or any kind of like, ability power scaling. So you could take it, but it feels like you're giving up a lot of power and compensation, right? Let's just assume that we get like a guard breaker. That's pretty much like 80% of what Biss is, but we get a Glass Cannon on top of that. And if you can get like one more belt, then we don't even need Blistering Strikes. So this is like one of those things where I think the trade-off of it might not be worth it in my book, unless he wants Pandora's items for a future 4 or 5 cost to itemize. Maybe he wants Pandora's items to transform these items to get something for Elise as a duo carry, and then later Aurora. That could be viable. I just think that this is a lot lower value in the late game than it is in stage 2 or stage 3. Big Front and Back Climb the Ladder, they're both like pretty solid, and they end up being just nice to have double combat. The thing about Climb the Ladder is that Climb the Ladder ends up being really powerful on a deep vertical that you're trying to buff on a specific carry. So Climb the Ladder ends up being really good in like Street Demon and Anima Squad, because as the Street Demon and Anima Squad units die in the front, Zaya and Brand get a lot stronger, and they become even harder to kill. We don't really have that with Morgana. When you have Climb the Ladder, the more Bastions die, the more it buffs, I guess, the Poppy. And Poppy's also solo frontline right now, so there's a little bit of awkwardness with positioning for Big Friend. I could see him taking this if he wants to just take 2 combat augments as opposed to 1. But I think on average, glass can's a little bit better in my opinion. We'll see. Okay. He actually took a long time to decide between that, but decided to go for glass cannon, which I think is ultimately the smarter pick. Like we said, it buffs his front line and his back line. Also, he doesn't need to glass cannon everything in the back. I think that's smart. He has these bastions stay in the 3rd row because who cares if they get the extra damage amp? They're pretty much just here to body block for the Morgana and help facilitate some of the traffic for Poppy. I also really like how he is not trying to just roll for this Jax 3 because he's just going to hope that he hits Jax 3 over time, just naturally. All right, going up against a strong Vex 2 board who rolled down to 0 and hit everything. And it looks like it's going to be a narrow loss. And it's really competitive with these like Vexotech boards that hit Vex 2, you know, roll down on 8 to 0. So that's a very good sign, the fact that we're competitive like that. Because if we had anti-heal against the opponent's Vex, we would have won that fight for sure. All right, didn't get the pan, but we got the Renekton off carousel, so that's okay. So I guess it was like a win-win situation. Either he gets a Renekton, which is a really powerful spike for the board for the 4 Bastion and Divinicore, or we got the pan. Looks like we also take the gold, which I think is correct. Again, in these gold situations, just take it unless you feel like you're in a spot economically where it won't punish you, or you need to Hail Mary for it. Ooh, it goes for the Reforge and gets 2 gloves. I'm wondering if he wants to go for these gloves here on Renekton instead. And then he gets to save the vest for anti-heal. So that glove ends up being quite good, actually. These gloves on Renekton is kind of amazing. I'm actually a little surprised that he would go for these gloves on the Renekton and not for the Elise, given that he's playing Glass Cannon. Like, Glass Cannon on the backline Dynamo can be really good as well. Ah, look at his frontline positioning here. He's going to actually move Renekton up. I think he's recognized that Poppy 3 can't really take as much punishment by herself anymore. And so by frontlining these other units, Poppy doesn't have to take so much pressure at the beginning of the fight, giving time for things like Gunblade to sustain her and letting Renekton get into the fight a little bit quicker. Oh, you know, one thing I kind of just forget to mention. This is actually part of the reason why his itemization choices pan out this way. Is that Renekton actually provides him anti-heal. It actually wounds. Oh, nice. We pick up Jax 3. So it's actually nice to tech into Renekton because he doesn't actually have to build that Sunfire as high of a priority. It's still important to get. I do think that Renekton's wounding and anti-healing is not very reliable, but it's not like he has 0. So it's nice to work off of that. Okay, he opens up and gets anti-heal, and then he can put Shiv onto the Elise, and everything's good to go. And now we're off to level 9. We did a really good job managing our econ by not rolling when we didn't need to. And now as a result, we're really rich and in a really good position to get to level 9, even if we lose the next fight. Which I don't think we will, by the way. I'm pretty sure this marksman board can't deal with the Poppy quick enough, and Morgana's just burning it down. All right, we get level to 9, and we're going to be looking for Aurora, if we can. We're going to play 6 Bastion, 3 Dynamo, and then eventually we're going to get to Aurora. Nice little inclusion of this Jhin as well for the Exotech, so you get a little Hyperfang action. I really like the way he's playing with his frontline and backline depth as well. You can see putting the Bastions and always making sure Poppy and Morgana are same size so that way they can target similar carries and burn it down. Ooh, looks like we do lose to the Cypher player. I question whether or not this Exotech is like that valuable, but it's okay to play this Jhin, I think. I think MF is not that much better, so it is something to think about. Okay, going up against the other Cypher Vexotech board. Previously, we lost this fight, but now we're level 9, and we have 6 Bastion. Surely, we are too strong to deal with because it was close. And he's going to sell this MF because, in the end, he's looking for Aurora anyways. He's going to look for another damage item here for Elise, so Guard Breaker or Gunblade is looking good. Okay, ends up getting the Gunblade for the Elise. It's pretty solid. One more Taker split. Now there's 6 people alive, and if you choose a 3-way split, you still get punished. Okay, I'm still taking 10 gold here every time. Unless, actually, he could be in a situation where he wants to take this to deny other people from getting a big spike of gold. So he could scout around and say, oh, these people still need gold to roll at level 9 or to get to level 9 for their 5 cost. I can take split here to stop people from getting a lot of gold. 6 players chose to split. Holy cow. Okay, that was not correct. I can't believe 6 people chose to split there. I think everyone might be thinking of the same thing, which is, I need the gold. I guess Wasian's choosing to deny the gold more than anything. That can't be right. You definitely should not be doing that. I want to highlight the positioning of this Xayah and Aphelios. This is actually designed to try and snipe this Morgana as soon as you can. You're supposed to try to kill the target and then snipe the Morgana ASAP. But notice how tanky Poppy is, especially with the double gunblade to sustain her. She didn't die that quickly. And as a result, Robin's Gambit to try to put the Xayah one row up to snipe the Morgana didn't even work. So it just goes to show you how important those tank items are to keep your board resilient against anti-Morgana or anti-backline measures. And this is an example of the positioning thing we talked about, which is by putting Poppy in these hexes row here, Sejuani can't ever actually hit this Morgana. She's going to cast and nothing will touch her. So this is just impossible for the unit to touch her in the corner. So it ends up being very, very nice specifically for this matchup. And there's nothing that Vex can do. Just keeps getting punished. Wasian's now finding the Aurora, and he's in a position to go to level 10. If he gets level 10 and gets the 4 Dynamo, the game is 100% over because that's just too much overwhelming value of the board. Pops his item, third item for Elise, and is going to be Guard Breaker. That's the only reasonable damage item besides Hand of Justice. Looks like he rolls down to see if he can find Renekton too, because he's in a Renekton pair. I think that's also completely reasonable. Probably just going to end the game here on 9 then, because I think he's not going to have enough gold to get to 10. And these last couple fights, by the way, he hasn't really repositioned very much. He just kind of kept it nice and steady because, I mean, he can just position anti-Sejuani every single time, and his opponents can't really do much about it. So it's looking like he's going to end on a pretty nice, comfortable win streak. He actually ends up reading that his opponent wants to swap to the other side, and he just keeps Poppy and Morgana on the left side. Good little read by Wasian to snipe this MF as soon as possible. And that is all she wrote. It's a first for rank 1 North America yet again. So as you can see, Morgana's really good. No artifacts, no crazy scaling augments, not even anything like wacky encounter required. Just nice, solid, fundamental, one-cost reroll, playing even, making good item decisions, and converting off of a level 9. Give it a try. Let me know what you think, and congratulations on all the free LP.